Cinemassacre's Kong-a-thon. No, thon, not thong. Let's do this. No monkeying around. I'm going to review all the Kong movies leading up to Skull Island on March 10th, so keep checking until then. Here we go. First up today, we're talking about the classic duology. That's right, I said duology, meaning the first two films from RKO, both released in 1933. I've already covered both these films during Monster Madness over the years. Now it's time to dust them off so you can now see them on YouTube. Enjoy. It's about time King Kong gets a Monster Madness. I'm ready to praise the everlasting shit out of his big hairy ass. I can't possibly praise this film enough. There's no way I can do it justice. So what, should I talk about the plot? Well, just for the hell of it, here's the gist. Carl Denham's a filmmaker on a voyage to Skull Island, an uncharted mystical land where prehistoric creatures run amok. He brings with him a young lady named Ann Darrow, who he casts as the lead actress. But the natives of the island capture her as a sacrifice to their god, the giant ape Kong. But Kong finds a unique interest in her and carries her off into the jungle. Denham and his crew venture in to get her back. In the end, Kong's captured and brought to New York City, where he escapes, retrieves Anne, and climbs the Empire State Building in one of the most iconic finales of all time. This is the stuff in which legends are born. I saw it when I was a little kid, and I was never the same after it. I found out later that I was not alone. It seems every filmmaker from Ray Harryhausen to Peter Jackson was inspired by it as well. And I saw it in the 80s. I can't even imagine how revolutionary it was back in 1933. Everything about it is entertaining. The jungle has such a magical quality. I love staring into the background, just knowing that all that stuff was crafted by hand. But the more times I see it and the more I analyze it, the more I fall in love with this movie. I highly recommend getting the double DVD release. On the second disc, there's a 7-part documentary detailing the making of Kong. As you probably know, King Kong and all the dinosaurs are stop motion, but it's hard to imagine the hard work that went into it. To animate 1 minute's worth of film could have taken 150 hours. And to combine the live actors with the stop motion footage, they had to invent all these new techniques. Sometimes the actors were performing in front of a rear projection. Other times, the two pieces of footage were composited together. And other times, the scenes with the real actors were projected into the background, frame by frame, while the stop-motion creatures were being animated around them. Also, there were full-size parts of Kong, such as the hand, the face, and the feet. For example, the scenes where Kong's stomping people in the ground, or putting them in his mouth. There's also a great moment on the DVD in which Peter Jackson and company recreate one of the movie's lost sequences, the spider pit scene, using the same crude techniques. These modern filmmakers found it to be a huge challenge, and that really says something. For 1933, it's just unbelievable what they accomplished. Still to this day, a lot of it's a mystery. It's not like now when a movie comes out, there's documentary footage and DVD bonus features up the ass. You know every last detail of how a movie's made. But back then, they knew better to keep a lot of it secret. It was more for the art and not just the money. Not to mention, we don't have the luxury of speaking to Willis O'Brien or any of the people associated with it. And let's not forget the sound design, which is equally one of the most important parts that make a movie. You have Kong roaring, which was a combination of different animal growls. You have a fully orchestrated musical score, and it's all blended together so well. And don't forget, this is a time when sound movies were still in their infancy. I can't think of anything that even comes close to being this groundbreaking. In film school, professors shove Citizen Kane up your ass and tell you it's the best movie ever made. Well, that too is a very monumental film, and it pioneered a lot of new techniques. But look at Kong, nearly a decade before it. Phenomenal visual effects, phenomenal soundtrack, and a timeless story of Beauty and Beast. It's an excellent film on every level. Why can't that be the best movie ever made? It shows fantasy and imagination, and that's what movies are all about. I'm bowing down and my balls are clapping. But now, let's get to the sequel. Yeah, the sequel, Son of Kong. I bet many people didn't even know this movie existed. That's because we're always too busy talking about the original. It's one of the first monster sequels ever made, and is the first Son of movie. Following in this tradition would be Son of Frankenstein, Son of Godzilla, Son of Blob, and even, if you want to count that. After King Kong opened as a smash hit in New York in March 1933, Merian C. Cooper, who directed it alongside Ernest B. Schoedsack, went to meet with the RKO studio executives and said he wanted to make a sequel and that he wanted to be even bigger and better than the original. The RKO board told him that's fine, but under certain conditions. The film would have half the budget of the original and be finished and released by December. Only 10 months away. And by the time they started filming, they had only 9 months. 9 months to finish the whole movie. The reasons were simple. The studio wanted to have the first movie still fresh in people's minds, because back then the idea of doing a sequel was a new thing. They didn't want people to forget about the original. They also didn't want other competitors to come along first and make their own King Kong ripoffs. And they also wanted it in time for the Christmas holiday season. To these knuckleheads, all that was more important than making a good movie. Luckily, the creative team did the best they could. It's no masterpiece, but it's much better than you'd expect. The plot feels like a natural continuation of the story. It has many of the same actors and feels just like the first movie is still going. It picks up almost immediately where it left off, with Carl Denham suffering from his share of hardships and paying the price for bringing King Kong to New York City. After the giant ape made his rampage through town, everybody is suing him for damages. He meets up again with the ship captain, Engelhorn, who's partially responsible, and they both go out and try to make some money shipping cargo. The movie continues at a leisurely pace and takes some time before the real action starts, very much like the first movie. My favorite standalone scene is when they stop to see a little show, and part of the performance involves real live monkeys playing instruments. It's a funny contrast to the giant monkey that caused all the destruction, but aside from that, it's simply hilarious. Apparently the show is tanking really bad, but I don't get it. This is great. There's this one little awkward pause where the monkeys all stop for a moment. It's just a funny, unnecessary scene with an awkward tone that I can't describe. The show is a small production run by one man and his daughter Hilda. Denham gets to know her, and the dialogue between them is rather charming and humorous.
Did you ever catch a monkey?
Did I ever? Lady, you'd be surprised.
Her father is an alcoholic who gets drunk one night with a shady fellow named Hellstrom. After insulting him, Hellstrom gets angry and in a drunken fit murders the father. Turns out Hellstrom was the man who originally gave Denham the map to Skull Island where they found Kong. Now he's telling them that he knows of a treasure that's hidden there. While it's the last thing they'd want to do, Denham and Engelhorn need the money badly, so they agree to take Hellstrom with them to return to Skull Island to find the treasure. Really, Hellstrom is a crooked scoundrel who is using them. Hilda stows away aboard the ship and is out for revenge against Hellstrom for killing her dad. It's a fairly complicated scenario, but all this character development is crucial to what makes the film so entertaining. Next thing, they're all thrown into another adventure, running from giant monsters and meeting the baby Kong, who they find stuck in quicksand. Denham helps the poor ape out, and they become friends. In return, Little Kong helps fight off all the other hostile beasts. Willis O'Brien is back doing the special effects. This is the biggest area where the movie suffers, unfortunately. The stop motion is still very impressive, but you can tell it's being rushed, and there's some cartoony moments. Lots of the model creatures are the same exact models recycled from the first movie, like the Brontosaurus and the Styracosaurus that was cut the first time around. Even Baby Kong is made from the armature of one of the original Kong models. Still, there's some new creatures. Considering these special effects scenes had to be made in less than 9 months, they're very good. It's a shame this movie is so overlooked. Any negative reception it's had is because nobody's given it a chance or has unreasonably high hopes that it will be as good as the original. The real shame is that had it not been rushed, it could have been. The characters are all great, even down to Hilda's drunken father, who is only a small part. Robert Armstrong is the real star here. He's an excellent actor and is even better in this movie than he was in the first one. His character is developed further. Denham's learned from his mistakes. He does things that redeem himself. He saves the baby Kong, and he's actually very likable this time. The movie is more about the characters than it is about the monster scenes. For the budget and time constraints, it was wise that they didn't try to top the first movie. This one is more humble and has a sense of humor. So there you have the classic Kong duology, although you can sort of call it a trilogy if you count Mighty Joe Young from 1949. The plot is unrelated, but it has the same creative team with director-producers Ernest Schoedsack and Marion Cooper. It has effects by Willis O'Brien and stars Robert Armstrong, who is not playing Carl Denham, but is a character very similar. It's the only film that comes close to being as awesome as the original. It's another masterpiece. I reviewed it last year during Monster Madness 10. If you want to see that, it's already on YouTube, so check it out. And next time, we get into the Toho duology. Today we're going to talk about the Toho duology, which includes King Kong vs. Godzilla and King Kong Escapes. Both, of course, made by Toho, the Japanese company who makes the Godzilla films. But first, I should mention there actually existed another set of Japanese Kong films made back in the 30s. Both of them are now lost. There only exists photos. The first was a silent comedy called Wasei King Kong. It was released in 1933, the same year of the original Kong duology. You could say it sure was trying to capitalize on the success. And they must have been so self-aware that the plot is actually about a man trying to capitalize on the success of Kong. He watches the movie and gets the idea to put on a theatrical play. He's trying to make money so he can marry his girlfriend by getting the approval of her father and proving that he's wealthy enough. The screenshots or publicity photos look really cool, but it's disappointing to know that it's just a guy playing an ape. Not that it would be real anyway, and the film's lost, so it doesn't matter. The second film, called King Kong Appears in Edo from 1938, was released in two parts, kind of like Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. It was a period piece drama with a complicated plot involving a father trying to find his kidnapped daughter. The man responsible uses a trained ape named King Kong to do his capturing. Other than the name, the creature doesn't seem to have anything to do with Kong and looks more like a generic Sasquatch or Yeti. In some of the promotional photos, he appears to be giant-sized, and in others, he appears human-sized. Nobody really knows for sure. Apparently, the suit actor, who was also the special effects technician, said in a 1988 interview that it was a giant ape. That would make this the first Japanese giant monster, and what's even more interesting, the same guy worked on the original Godzilla suit. Hopefully one day these films may be discovered, but it seems unlikely. Now on to the Toho films. The next time Kong made a big comeback was in 1962 with King Kong vs. Godzilla, the American monster versus the Japanese monster, the East versus the West. This is one of the all-time classic monster mashups, up there with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. This was the first time both Kong and Godzilla appeared in color. I've already reviewed this film during Monster Madness Godzillathon, which was back in 2008. Holy crap. I focused mostly on Kong fighting Godzilla, but I hope I didn't give the impression that the whole movie is one big monster battle, because it's not. The monsters only fight at the very end, aside from one other brief encounter, but still, the whole movie is entertaining. It reboots the Kong universe and places him on Faro Island rather than Skull Island. Here, the head of a TV network sends two bumbling men over to capture Kong to gain publicity and boost ratings. But Kong gets loose during transport, and meanwhile, Godzilla breaks free from his iceberg, keeping continuity with the Godzilla franchise. Of course, they cross paths and take an immediate dislike for one another, but hey, let's back up. I didn't mention Kong fights a giant octopus, which is a combination of both real and fake ones. They use stop motion when the tentacles are picking up people, and some kind of rubber version that attacks Kong. This one doesn't move at all and looks like it's wrapped in cellophane. Maybe because it is. It's even more hilarious than Ed Wood's Bride of the Monster. That one at least had strings. The only good octopuses back then that I can recall are from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and It Came From Beneath the Sea, which all use different techniques. When you see the real octopus, it's obvious that it's authentic. There was actually 4 of them, and I don't know if it's true, but there's some trivia out there that the special effects director, Eiji Tsuburaya, ate one of them. Well, he sure got a lot of use out of that, didn't he? His dinner was one of Kong's opponents. Could you imagine being able to say, I eat my special effects. Stan Winston ain't got shit. That T-Rex from Jurassic Park was pretty awesome, but did he eat it? Probably not. Subaraya, man, fucking eats that shit! Kong, of course, is a rubber suit in the Japanese tradition of effects. But man, he looks like roadkill. It's awful, but I wouldn't want to have it any other way. He's always got this silly look on his face, and he does a goofy dance, not to mention he's hooked on drinking berry juice. They had to jack him up to Godzilla's size just so they could fight. When discussing the original film, Kong is said to vary between 18 to 24 feet tall, depending on whether he's on Skull Island or in New York City. But Godzilla has always been much taller than that. In the original Japanese Godzilla film, he's 50 meters, which would be 164 feet. But in the English dubbed version, they say he's over 400 feet tall. Whatever the case, they're now the same height and evenly matched. But, oh wait, Godzilla breathes fire. Well, that sucks for Kong. The fight starts off exactly as you'd expect, with Kong getting his ass handed to him. There's a great moment where he throws a rock and Godzilla flings it back with his tail. Then there's that weird stop-motion kick. But things take a turn when Kong is struck by lightning. They established earlier that electricity makes him stronger, and this is when the fight really starts. Kong swings Godzilla around by his tail and shoves a tree down his throat. Then there's the part where they both look like hand puppets. It's weird. It's just a bunch of laugh-out-loud effects, one after another. It's great. I love this fight. As I mentioned in Godzillathon, I said it could use a remake. As much as I'll always enjoy the silliness, it would be neat to see them have a serious rematch using really good effects. And since then, that's finally been announced. But we still have until 2020 before we finally see it. Hopefully. It will probably be too heavy on the CG, but still, with Kong fighting Godzilla, how can that ever get old? Of all the Godzilla films in Japan, this one holds the highest number in box office attendance, and I'm not surprised. When I was first getting into these films before the internet, there was an old rumor that Toho made two endings to the film. In the Japanese version, Godzilla wins. In the American version, Kong wins. I first heard about it in the Crestwood House books, and it drove me nuts. When the internet came out, I remember asking on message boards, trying to track down the Japanese version, but it turned out, all along, it was total bullshit. In both versions, the monsters both tumble into the ocean. Kong is the only one that surfaces. He swims away, the end. But there is one tiny difference, and only an audio difference. When it says the end, in the American version you hear Kong roar, but in the Japanese version you hear them both roar. I can only speculate that this might have something to do with the origin of the double ending myth, or somebody just completely let their imagination run away. It was originally published in magazines in the 60s and persisted in news articles and even a Trivial Pursuit board game. There were plenty of other differences with the films. Universal handled the American release and added scenes with American actors. They also used a lot of music from their horror library. If you're a Universal Monster fan, you'll notice cues from The Wolfman and Creature from the Black Lagoon. But there's still a lot of original music. I especially like the songs the island natives perform to Kong to make him go to sleep. All around, it's a fun film. As I mentioned in Godzillathon, there were connections with Frankenstein. I'd like to explain that a little better. Originally, it was conceived as King Kong versus Frankenstein and was proposed by Willis O'Brien, the original Kong effects artist. It's said he envisioned the movie as having Kong fight against a monster created by Dr. Frankenstein by stitching together different animal parts. The idea was shopped around, and eventually Toho decided to make it, but replaced the Frankenstein monster with Godzilla. Kong is energized with electricity, which is just like the Frankenstein monster, so it's possible they may have used bits and pieces of the original idea and put Kong in the Frankenstein monster's place while swapping Godzilla to the other role. It's just my own speculation. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster was originally written to be a Kong film, but he was replaced with Godzilla. When you watch it, it makes perfect sense. Godzilla is discovered on an island, and he picks up a young woman who he sort of falls in love with, I guess. You don't see Godzilla doing that. Not to get sidetracked, but as far as the rest of the Frankenstein stuff goes, they made Frankenstein Conquers the World featuring a giant Frankenstein monster who fights against Baragon. There is a sequel called Frankenstein's Monsters, Sanda vs. Gyra, also known as War of the Gargantuous. It's about two hairy monsters that fight each other. In the Japanese version, it's explained that they both spawned from cells of the Frankenstein monster, but in the American version, they changed all mentions of Frankenstein to Gargantuous. And from that point on, it started a trend where in the German releases, they started changing the titles of Godzilla films to include Frankenstein. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster became Frankenstein and the Monsters from the Sea. Son of Godzilla became Frankenstein's Monsters Hunt Godzilla's Son. Destroy All Monsters became Frankenstein and the Monsters from Space. Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster became Frankenstein's Battle Against the Devil's Monsters. Godzilla vs. Gigan became Frankenstein's Hellspawn. Is that weird or what? As far as I know, there's no big changes to the films themselves. Frankenstein doesn't actually show up. It's just something they did with the titles. Frankenstein must have been really popular in Germany, or at least more familiar of a name with German audiences. They wanted to have a name that was more well-known. I don't know for a fact if it was any more well-known in Germany than in the rest of the world, but I stated in Godzillathon that it made sense because the Frankenstein monster is from Germany. I will back up that claim. Many people point out that Mary Shelley was not from Germany, she was from England, but I was talking about the character in the book. Frankenstein, who's born in Italy, travels to Germany where he creates the monster, meaning, yes, absolutely, the monster is from Germany. Mary Shelley herself traveled to Germany before writing the book and may have gotten inspiration from the real-life Castle Frankenstein, which means Frank of the Stones. There was a guy named Johann Dippel who was rumored to have robbed graves and experimented with corpses and happened to have been born at the same castle. This could be a coincidence, and it's possible Mary Shelley might have not even visited the castle, but there's enough to connect the Frankenstein monster with Germany. Now let's get back on track with King Kong. There's more alternate titles, but they start to steer more towards Kong now. The German version of Godzilla vs. Megalon was called King Kong, Demons from Outer Space. In this version, Jet Jaguar is called King Kong. In Godzillathon, I said there was a rumor that there was altered dialogue to suggest that it was actually King Kong inside the robot suit, which is hilarious. How would Kong even fit in there? But it seems there's no truth to that. It was only a rumor, as I said. King Kong was the name only and nothing else. The German version of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla was called King Kong vs. Godzilla. Boy, that would have been confusing. So does that mean Mechagodzilla is King Kong? And here comes my favorite one. Terror of Mechagodzilla was called Konga Godzilla King Kong, the spawn of the devil. So not only is there Kong and Godzilla, but we have Konga and the fucking devil? I wish there was something more to it than just the title, because I would have totally watched that. It was common for different countries to rename movies depending on what they thought would make the most money. But anyway, let's move on to Toho's second Kong film, King Kong Escapes. It was known in Germany as King Kong Frankenstein's Son. This film is not a sequel to Kong vs. Godzilla. It's actually based on an animated Kong TV series by Rankin Bass. It's about an evil scientist named Doctor Who. That's right, just like the TV series. In the German version, his name is Doctor Who? No, really, I mean, guess who? Dr. Frankenstein. That was easy. Doctor Who is a great cliché villain walking around in a black cape. He's kind of like the Asian version of Christopher Lee. He's trying to dig for a radioactive material known as Element X. He's working for Madame Piranha, who presumably wants to use the weapon to create nuclear weapons. They keep mentioning she comes from some certain country, but they never explain what country it is. Anyway, to dig for the element, Doctor Who creates a giant mechanical King Kong. It could have been any other type of machine, but I guess it's just more awesome for it to have the likeness of a giant ape. Meanwhile, there's a group of explorers on an island who have almost the exact same experience as Carl Denham and company. They encounter the real King Kong, who picks up the girl and places her in a tree while he fights a T-Rex. So it's almost like a remake of the original Kong, for just a bit. He even uses the same finishing move, tearing the dinosaur's mouth open. The Kong suit looks slightly better than in Kong vs. Godzilla, meaning it looks like it came from a Halloween store rather than being found flattened on a highway. It has sort of a cartoonish face, looking goofy in its own way, almost like this time it was actually meant to be funny. His opponent is called Gorosaurus, who makes another appearance in Destroy All Monsters. Afterwards, Kong fights a serpent, which is a reminder of the scene in the original Kong where he fights a plesiosaur. I bet most people think it's a giant snake. I admit it took me several watches to notice the fins. Anyway, Mecha Kong, who is actually known as Mechani Kong, fails the digging mission because the radiation from the element X makes the robot malfunction. So Doctor Who captures the real Kong and uses him instead, controlling him under hypnosis. When he digs, the radiation causes him to revert back to his normal self. He goes on the loose, or escapes as the title says, and Doctor Who sends Mechani Kong after him. In the end, the two Kongs fight and you get your money's worth. It may not be on the same level as Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, but it's still a satisfying battle. But when you stop and think about it, as far as the plot is concerned, it's only a coincidence that they end up fighting. Mechani Kong wasn't created to fight the real Kong in the first place, it was created to dig for element X. It just so happened they ended up fighting. The whole film doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's very entertaining. It has a little bit of a James Bond type of feel. I don't have as much to say with this one. There's no more Frankenstein trivia to get me sidetracked. But anyway, next time, it's more rubber suits. Let's talk about the Kong duology from the Dino De Laurentiis Company. Today, let's talk about the duology of Kong films both directed by John Guillermin. The first was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, and the second was under his film company. First up, the 1976 remake of King Kong. Ever since I was a kid, I always disregarded this one. The original was so perfect, I thought it was sacrilegious to remake it. Whenever I'd look in the TV guide and see King Kong is playing tonight, I'd get excited and turn on the TV, only to find out it was the remake. I would get pissed off. The original film had a fast-paced, surreal fantasy quality with stop-motion dinosaurs, and this one had no dinosaurs. It was grounded more in reality. It was slower paced and boring. It was in color, but it was darker and more dreary. It didn't have that beautiful black and white glow with matte painted scenery. I didn't like it. But as the years went on, I realized it may not have been as bad as I thought. I just gave it another watch. It's now once again fresh in my mind, and I think it's pretty good. In its own way. If it is a lousy remake, it's lousy only in comparison. The plot is a modification of the original. It follows the basic gist. A group of characters journey to a mysterious island, encounter Kong, and bring him back to civilization. It plays up the same idea that the greed of humanity brings about destruction. But many things were changed. Instead of the showman Carl Denham, we have an executive from an oil corporation who travels to the island in search of oil. Luckily, they have another ship which happens to have a cargo area big enough to fit a giant gorilla, because that's what they get instead. Oil or giant ape, whatever, right? A paleontologist who specializes in primates sneaks on board the ship because he's interested in the island for his own reasons. He wants to see Kong, which only he knows exists. He's played by Jeff Bridges, and I suppose he's the equivalent of the Jack Driscoll character from the original, sharing the first name only. Like the original, he becomes the love interest of the Ann Darrow character, who this time is named Dwan, and is an aspiring actress, whereas in the original, Carl Denham finds her on the streets and asks her to become an actress. As much as I prefer Fay Wray from the original, Jessica Lange is a worthy update. Instead of screaming the whole time, she actually talks back to Kong, even punching him in the face. Dude, she punches Kong in the face! As mentioned, there's no dinosaurs, and I think having dinosaurs would have been important because without Kong defending her from the T-Rex, it gives Dwan less reason to accept that Kong doesn't want to hurt her. He does fight a giant snake, and you don't go into this film expecting a gore fest, but when all of a sudden he rips that fucking snake apart, holy goddamn, that is disgusting. It shocks me every time. After Kong is captured, he's used as a promotion for the gas company, which I find to be the most ridiculous laugh-out-loud part of the film. They reveal him by placing him inside a giant gas pump. Meanwhile, they make Dwan reenact her capture by the natives on Kong's island. She just recently lived through a horrible experience. Now she has to pretend to live it again? There's a few shots in this scene where Kong is actually a full-scale 40-foot tall animatronic ape. I don't think that's ever been done or ever will be done again. Originally, they wanted to use this thing in the majority of the film, but it didn't work out very well. In these shots, you can tell Kong's movement is very limited, but the rest of the time, when he's a person in a suit, he looks amazing. It's like they took the same idea Toho had, but perfected it. Let's talk about the effects. The suit was worn and designed by Rick Baker. He's known for American Werewolf in London, amongst many other things. And speaking of primates, he also worked on Harry and the Hendersons. I know it's a comedy, but they took the effects seriously. The range of expressions on Harry is unbelievable. If you want to see really good effects, watch this. Anyway, with Kong, they also repeated the old tricks from the original, like the giant hands and feet, proving that the old effects were so groundbreaking that over 40 years later, they were still being used. There's also a lot of miniatures for Kong to destroy, beginning with the wall on Skull Island. When he smashes that thing, you can tell it's really getting smashed. There's so much detail on everything. Even when he's trying to break out of his cargo chamber on the boat, you can see the waste pipes breaking and shit water coming out. Really? What other film would they show you that? Shit water coming out of the waste pipes. Maybe that's not actually what it's supposed to be. Maybe it's water for it's pipes that it's shit water. When he gets loose in New York City, this is like seeing another big budget Godzilla film, except with Kong. The best part is when he attacks the train. This is your quintessential monster rampage scene at its finest. This moment is so iconic, it was made into a theme park ride at Universal. Even though this was a Paramount film, Universal got the merchandising rights. Oddly, the ride was made around the same time as the sequel, King Kong Lives. Here's footage I got when I was at Universal Hollywood in '95. It was part of the main train ride that takes you on the backlot tour. I also went to the other one at Universal Orlando, Florida in '99, which was its own separate ride called Kongfrontation, but it was basically the same thing. These rides were awesome. You got to see an animatronic monster right in front of your face. It was as close as you could get to meeting the real Kong. You could even smell his breath, which was banana scented. Unfortunately, neither one of these rides exist anymore. The Hollywood version was lost in a fire, and the Orlando version was closed. Since then, there's been a new version based on the Peter Jackson remake. No animatronics, it's all on a 360 wraparound screen in 3D. I've never seen it, I'm sure it's really awesome too, but without the animatronic Kong, it can't be the same. Back to the film. The final thing to mention is the climax. Instead of the Empire State Building, Kong climbs the World Trade Center, which at the time was the tallest building in New York City. It also made sense that Kong associated it with the highest mountains on Skull Island, where he would proudly perch upon to boast his king status. This time they have to spell it out for you with a cross dissolve, as Jack notices the two towers match two mountains from Skull Island. Yeah, didn't really need that. Anyway, it ends basically the same way as the original, but this time he's shot down by men in helicopters. They play up the emotional angle by making Dwan cry because she cares for the giant ape, and they amp up the gore by making Kong spray blood everywhere, which was unnecessary. The bullet wounds didn't have to be so exaggerated. He's almost completely covered in red. As a kid, I couldn't even watch this part because I was so disturbed by it. Anyway, it's a competent remake, but the main reason why it's worthwhile is the award-winning effects. Kong himself is excellent, but the rest is pretty bland. It was successful at the box office, but pales in comparison to the original and the major blockbuster of its time, Jaws, which was released the year before. The ape followed in the shark's wake, trying to do something as big and ambitious. Both films featured animatronic animals that would malfunction on set. Both featured a character who's an animal expert. Both came from the same genre pool of 70s blockbusters, but Kong doesn't hold the same kind of rewatch value today. It doesn't beg to be seen. It's well made, but not as significant. It's interesting to note that there almost existed two remakes at the same time. The De Laurentiis one was distributed by Paramount, and the other one by Universal, which never got made. It was going to be called The Legend of King Kong. Paramount and Universal both approached RKO at the same time to buy a license to remake Kong. I have no idea whether there was some resurgence of Kong interest all of a sudden or it was just a coincidence, but anyway, when Universal found out Paramount was also making a Kong movie, they got pissed and it started a big legal battle amongst all these different parties: RKO, Universal, Paramount, and even Richard Cooper, the son of the original director, jumped in. It was a royal rumble. It's extremely confusing. I spent days researching this, more time than I did working on the main review. I actually got on the phone with my attorney for an hour to figure out who now owns King Kong. We dug up all kinds of documents, and basically, it's a clusterfuck. Paramount and Universal were allowed to both do their own remakes. Paramount made Kong 76, while Universal postponed their own film, which didn't really happen, at least not until 29 years later with the 2005 Peter Jackson version. Universal had their own history with Kong. They distributed the American version of Kong vs. Godzilla, and even then there was legal issues. And after the 76 legal issues, they got the rights to the theme park attractions, merchandise, and presumably the name and character. This occurred when they purchased the rights from Cooper's son for around $200,000 after a judge ruled that the Cooper estate did in fact own the rights to the name and character. In 1982, Universal filed a lawsuit against Nintendo because of Donkey Kong. Now obviously, Donkey Kong, a giant ape who captures a girl and climbs on top of a building, is a blatant reference to King Kong. Whether you call it a ripoff or a parody or a tribute or what, it didn't really matter because the court ruled in favor of Nintendo. The common story that goes around is that Universal didn't actually own King Kong, but that's not entirely true. This is where it gets really confusing. It seems Universal does own Kong, they just didn't have a trademark on the name, but in all other ways you look at it, they own the rights to making Kong films. But in this particular situation, they didn't have any case. A video game reference like Donkey Kong wasn't causing any confusion or taking money away from Universal. Universal was acting on it just to gain additional profits. They were abusing their power and wound up having to pay Nintendo's legal bills. In the 70s, when Universal was trying to sue RKO and Paramount, they argued that the Kong name and character was in the public domain, but it actually turned out it was owned by Cooper, so Universal bought it all from Cooper, and to this day, as far as I know, Universal still holds the exclusive rights to making Kong films, plus the theme parks and merchandise. The deal Paramount got out of it was just to do the 76 remake, and that was it. There was a novelization of the original Kong that came out alongside the original movie, and that elapsed into public domain by the time the remake was made, which I assume means just the text of that book is in the public domain. But to this day, the Cooper estate owns the rights to publishing all other novels and comic books. As far as the individual films go, they're all owned by different companies. The first two films were owned by RKO. After RKO went defunct, Ted Turner bought them, and the Turner Collection is now distributed by Warner Brothers. Kong vs. Godzilla and Kong Escapes are owned by Toho in Japan, by Universal in America. Kong 76 is owned by Paramount. King Kong Lives, nobody gives a shit. Kong 2005 is Universal, and Skull Island is Warner Brothers, who were given permission by Universal. Whew. Anyway, if I'm going to finish these videos in time for Skull Island, I gotta hurry up and talk about King Kong Lives. De Laurentiis was executive producer on this one, and it has the same director, John Gillerman. It functions as a straight-up sequel, but it was released in '86, 10 years later, so I guess that's the reason it begins with a recap of the ending of the last film to refresh your memory. Yeah, it does it the Rocky way. After being shot to a bloody mess and falling from one of the tallest buildings in the world, he's still barely alive. He's been in a coma for the past 10 years, being watched over in some kind of institute by a doctor played by Linda Hamilton from The Terminator. In order to keep Kong alive any longer, they have to do two things: give him an artificial heart and give him a blood transfusion from another giant ape. Well, luckily, another giant ape just happens to be captured, but it's female, which might get Kong too excited or would cause problems or whatever, so there's a big debate about that. But they go ahead with the blood transfusion. They transplant the heart, which is a huge process. They have to chainsaw into his chest. They lift out his heart on a crane. They place the robot heart in. And can we stop for a second? Why are they trying to keep King Kong alive? There's no clear reason for anything, but anyway, Kong wakes up and just like his normal self, breaks loose. What'd you expect? That stupid cage from the first movie couldn't contain him. Now all he has is some handcuffs. He escapes easily and goes after the Lady Kong. And you know what? This is one of two things that makes this movie worthwhile. Seeing Kong get together with a lady ape is nice. I mean, he finally found a woman his own size. That's what he deserved all along. There's long, peaceful scenes where they communicate without any dialogue, obviously, and that's where films are at their best, with visual storytelling. It's like finding a fresh strawberry inside of a turd. The other good part is the end, when Kong faces the military for his final time. This time it's a full-on battle against tanks. The human villains in this film are so cruel, you just want to see Kong smash them to bits. You cheer for him the whole way. I love it when he picks up the tanks and throws them to the ground, it's great. Even though he keeps getting shot and his fur is soaked in blood, he keeps on going. He just doesn't give a fuck. This time he actually wins. This is satisfying. Isn't that what you wanted to see all along? Kong actually win for once? But then guess what? He dies. Again. The movie's called King Kong Lives. Why does he die? It's like a tease. But he gets a nice prize at the end. Right before he dies, he gets to see his kid. Aw, baby Kong, isn't that nice? Oh, when did that happen, you might ask? I mean, did you really want them to show that part? No. Overall, it's a bad movie, but there's enough highlights to make it worthwhile. If you just want to see Kong, but without holding any high standard, it can be enjoyed. And it's the last time we will ever see practical Kong effects done with suits and animatronics. We can at least appreciate what we had, now that it's gone. After this, it seemed there would never be another Kong movie again, but thanks to Lord of the Rings and Peter Jackson, they found a way. Stay tuned. In 2005, Kong was remade again. Universal offered the directing job to Peter Jackson, and following the success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it went into production. It seemed he was able to get a lot of artistic control, becoming one of the auteur directors of our time. That's when a movie has a signature stamp, a look and feel that makes it seem it's all coming from an individual artist, even though, of course, movies are a huge collaborative effort. Most of the crew was the same group of artists he assembled for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so it was a smooth transition straight off of Return of the King, the only fantasy sequel to win a Best Picture award. Right away, it had all the signs that it would get the best possible treatment, but what sold me was getting the chance to know beforehand who Peter Jackson was and his relationship with Kong. Like me, he was inspired by the original Kong as a child. It was clear he had a lot of respect for the original, and during the production of the remake, he did a web series in which he was able to show us behind-the-scenes footage without spoiling much. It brought us closer to the filmmaking experience, so we were with him every step of the way. Also, even though Kong and all the creatures were computer-generated, he had experience with the classic style of effects in recreating a lost scene from the original. When Kong throws everybody into the pit, we assume they just die, but originally the scene continued at the bottom of the pit where they fight giant spiders and creatures. This part was cut and destroyed, and to this day only a still image exists. Just for fun, Peter Jackson and company decided to film their own version of this scene. Based on the original script, they did their best job to make it as authentic as possible, as if this is what the scene might have been like. They shot it on film with the same camera, using stop motion and all the old techniques. They had to overcome the same challenges as in 1933 and got a hands-on appreciation out of it. It was included on one of the DVD editions of the original Kong, but Jackson insisted that it would not be edited into the film itself, but provided as a separate bonus feature because he didn't want to put his own fingerprints on the original film. Given all this context of how much he respected the original, I was totally on board with the remake. In most other situations, I would have been against it, but with this, they made all the right moves. I was really hyped for it, and when I saw it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even though nothing will ever come close to the original, I saw this as a loving tribute. It's set in the 30s, making it the only Kong remake to take place in the same time period as the original. I've always had conflicting thoughts about that. It's nice to have a bigger window to look into the world that the original took place in, but on the other hand, it would have been nice to differentiate it more from the original. The main plot is the same, though once again, the circumstances which bring everybody onto the boat are different. Jack Driscoll, for instance, is the writer of the film that Carl Denham is intending to make, and the dialogue includes lines from the original, almost as if they're filming scenes from the original Kong. I like the cast. I like Adrian Brody, Naomi Watts, and I also like Jack Black, but in this particular film, I'm conflicted. I like him in other films. I love Tenacious D, but I don't really see him as Carl Denham. He has the face of a quirky artist, not a greedy businessman. There's nothing wrong with his performance. I just think of all the people who could play Carl Denham, it was an odd choice. Kong himself is great. Even though it's CG, there is somebody actually performing him, the master of motion capture, Andy Serkis. It makes sense that every Kong film utilizes the special effect techniques of their time. It also stands as a marker in film history to measure the time span from the original Kong and to show what it looks like in this day and age. The CG is done with the best care possible. It looks the best it possibly can, and if you compare it with the original, of course the effects in the remake are more versatile and more convincing, but no matter what, it's not as appealing as the stop motion, and I would even argue that with the 76 version at its best moments looks more real because there's actually physically something there. Of course, without the CG, we wouldn't be able to have such an epic T-Rex battle scene. The creatures are able to move around so much and swing on vines. I really like the part when the T-Rex is tangled, but he wants to eat Anne so badly he doesn't care. The fact that he's wrapped up in vines is not a concern. It's more important that he gets her in his mouth. Then after Kong defeats them all, he stands next to Anne, turning his head the other way as if to say, "I saved you. Don't say thanks or anything." The body language is great. Kong is able to convey a lot of emotion. I also really like when he tips over Anne and laughs. What an ass. There's one major problem with this movie, and it's an obvious one. It's too long. Many people have probably said that already, but it's true. There's too much filler, too much fat. In the theater, I didn't mind it, though my bladder minded. By the time I got to the 3-hour mark, I had to piss. Wish I didn't drink anything, but I kept saying, "Fuck you, bladder. Kong's swatting down planes. I'm not leaving my seat for anything." But seriously, when you look at the original film and how efficiently it tells its story, you realize you don't need all that detail, like Anne losing her job, Denham getting the idea to go to Skull Island, and the long voyage itself. Even though I enjoy the details, I liked all the little things like seeing Kong climbing up into his mountain lair and seeing all those skeletons of other Kongs suggesting that he might be the last of his kind. I see it as a supplement to the original film, an extension of it. It makes the world bigger. When we're in New York City, they show us every aspect of it to make us feel like we're really in 1930s New York. And on Skull Island, we get a sense of the whole land, the natives, and wildlife. There's a documentary on the DVD about New York in the 30s which covers the Depression, vaudeville, and Prohibition. But then you have a fictional documentary about Skull Island which elaborates on how all these animals came to be there. Having a fake documentary alongside a real one made the fiction seem more real. The original film tells the story better and more concisely, but this one is more about building the world. As much as I like this film, watching it at home, I'm never able to enjoy it quite as much as I did in the theater. The initial hype I had has long worn off, and I'm never able to recapture that same feeling. It doesn't hold up in the same way the original does, not that I'd expect it to. It makes you appreciate the original even more, so this remake sort of did a service to it by showing us, even in 2005, with a budget exceeding $200 million, the original still can't be duplicated. In one of his web videos, Peter Jackson said there was going to be 2 sequels, Son of Kong and Into the Wolf's Lair. They would have taken place 10 years later during World War II. The plot involved Kong's son being used by Denham to help in the war and fight against monsters created by the Nazis. If it sounds too amazing to be true, it is. The video was posted on April 1st. Yeah, it was a joke, but they have interview clips from the cast and crew, and everybody has a straight face. They even show you miniatures and preliminary work to back it up. It's really funny how serious they play it. I kind of wish these sequels would have actually happened, and that's when I realized how much I like Kong films, even if it's B-movie quality. I'm in. That's why I'm looking forward to Skull Island. It's not a remake, it's just another movie with Kong. No high expectations, just a good cast with John Goodman and Samuel L. Jackson. I'm sure it'll be fun. As a little bonus for Kongathon, let's talk about the rip-off films. I'm not talking about parodies and spoof films, but films that are obviously trying to cash in on King Kong. Also, it needs to have a giant-sized ape. It can't be a smaller ape like King Kung Fu or King of Kong Island or Schlock or Gorilla at Large or all those Three Stooges shorts that feature a person in an ape suit. Also, Mighty Joe Young disqualifies itself because it's too good. It was made by the same creative team as Kong, so if it's a ripoff, it's a self-ripoff. It doesn't fit, and if I did include it, it would beat out all the others by far. It's such a masterpiece, it actually comes close to the original. If I put it on a top ripoff list, I'd have to leave at least 3 spots blank because nothing else could come second to it. So, let's get started. Top 5 King Kong ripoffs. Number 5, The Mighty Gorga from 1969. A circus owner goes to Africa to find a giant ape. While there, he's attacked by a plastic toy dinosaur. And I mean that, it's a toy T-Rex. It's awesome. Then Gorga, the giant ape, fights it, and this is it. Once you've seen this fight, you'll never think about life the same way again. The T-Rex also appeared in the caveman porno 1 Million AC/DC, written by Ed Wood. Written. As if there's something to write. Number 4, Queen Kong from 1976. This one is intended as a comedy and even had musical scenes. It's basically the same plot as Kong, but the gender roles are reversed, with a lady Kong picking up a human guy, and the final rampage takes place in London. The T-Rex fight makes another comeback, which is a slight upgrade on Mighty Gorga. Also, it was made around the same time as the '76 remake when all the legal issues were flaring up between Universal, RKO, Paramount, and Richard Cooper. So it got numerous legal objections from RKO and Dino De Laurentiis, who prevented it from being distributed, particularly in the UK. This is why it became incredibly hard to find. Number 3, Ape from 1976. This is another one made to cash in on the '76 remake. It was an American and South Korean co-production. It begins abruptly with the giant ape fighting a shark, so I guess it's ripping off Jaws too. And holy shit, he tears the shark in half. There's times when we make fun of effects that look too fake, but then there's strange exceptions like this, where it looks too real. I mean, they must have used a real dead shark and the person in the ape suit ripped it in half. It's nasty. The ape gets loose in South Korea, picks up a girl, fights the military, all that stuff. But the best moment is when the ape smashes a helicopter and then gives the finger. The middle finger! He flips the bird! It comes out of nowhere. Nothing else like that happens. It's incredible. For its Grindhouse re-release, it was retitled Attack of the Giant Horny Gorilla. No, I would not make that up. They used the tagline, not to be confused with King Kong. Whether it was done as a joke or to avoid legal trouble, it actually got them legal trouble from Paramount, supposedly because they used the name King Kong in connection with their advertising and not as an actual disclaimer. Basically, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, but just got a big shit sandwich instead. Much like the movie. Number 2, Conga from 1961. Here's another one where the ape attacks London. This time it starts out as an ordinary chimpanzee who's turned giant-sized by a scientist played by Michael Gough, known as Alfred in the Batman movies. He has some rival scientists who are competing in his field, so he sends the ape to kill them. That's all the plot you need. Just get a giant ape, send him on a rampage, and you'll even get a comic book out of it. Apparently, the name Conga was similar enough to Kong, so they had to pay RKO a fee, again bringing the legal rights into question. The outcome of the '70s legal battle determined that RKO only owned the rights to the first 2 films, and all rights to everything else related to Kong was owned by the Cooper estate. Back when they made Kong vs. Godzilla, Toho had to pay RKO a fee, and Marion C. Cooper got involved and tried to claim he owned it, and for some reason it stayed with RKO that time, even though the Cooper Estate got it in the 70s, but I don't know. I'm not getting into all that fucking shit again. Anyway, the real reason to watch this one and why it ranks higher than most of the rest is because of Michael Gough. He makes a great villain. Holy shit, Batman, it was the Butler all along. And the number one Kong ripoff, Mighty Peking Man, 1977. This is as good as it gets, the best of the ripoffs. It was made in Hong Kong. That's right, it's the only Hong Kong King Kong film. Say that 3 times fast. Hong Kong King Kong, Hong Kong King Kong, Hong Kong King Kong. It was re-released in the 90s by Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, he knows all the good stuff. The plot is the same basic thing. Greedy men go into the jungle, capture a giant ape, and bring it back to the city. The ape's love interest is a jungle woman who's been stranded for years and adapted to the wild. The ape suit is pretty good in comparison with the rest, and the miniature buildings, explosions, and special effects are all around top-notch for this type of genre. It's all the awesome Asian monster action that you'd want. But the craziest thing about this film is the ending. It has the most brutal and fucking cruel ending to any giant ape film ever. It's the same basic thing where the ape climbs the building with the girl and gets shot down by the military. But not only that, the girl gets shot too. They kill the girl. Isn't it depressing enough the ape has to die? They gotta kill the girl too? To make it worse, the reason she dies is because she can't stop clinging to the ape. She's the one who puts herself in harm. Rather than Beauty kills the Beast, Beast kills Beauty and himself. And they make you care for her. You want to see her live, and presumably she doesn't. Not only that, the shooting goes on for an excruciatingly long time. From the moment they start opening fire, about 10 minutes pass before he finally falls off the building. But before they even let him fall, they torch him! There's no way they faked it. The whole ape suit is set ablaze. Then he goes flying off the building like a giant ball of flame, and unlike all the other movies where they don't show the actual landing, this time they give you everything. He hits another building, which explodes. Damn! This makes the real Kong movies look like sissy films. Anyway, if it wasn't for the convoluted legal history of Kong, I bet there would exist even more rip-offs. Wouldn't it be great if the character was in the public domain? Because then we could have King Kong in space, King Kong bangs your mom, and so on. If they could get away with all these unauthorized Bruce Lee films, then why not more Kongsploitation? King Kong versus Bruce Lee. That would be something. Hong Kong, King Kong, Hong Kong, King Kong, Hong Kong, King Kong. Ugh.